Our strategic Canada-EU strategic partnership for the future will build a new and deeper relationship. That was Prime Minister Mark Carney speaking from Brussels after signing historic agreement with the European Union. January 22nd, 2026, a partnership that redirects $260 billion United States dollars in trade flows away from American ports, American inspection systems, American intermediation, bypassing the United States completely. And the most destabilizing consequence has not yet appeared in any headline. While Trump threatened Canada with annexation, Canada locked in European partnership. While Trump imposed tariffs to punish Ottawa, European capital started flowing to Canadian infrastructure. While Trump assumed Canadian trade must pass through American control points, Canada built direct transatlantic corridors that eliminate American leverage entirely. The shock is absolute. United States border cities, port operators, manufacturers watching decades of trade dominance evaporate, and Trump has zero tools to reverse it. Today, we are showing you exactly how this Canada-EU partnership transforms North Atlantic trade, how $260 billion in redirected flows bypass American infrastructure, how European institutional investors committed tens of billions to Canadian ports and rail networks, how $110 billion in additional manufacturing costs hit American producers while Canada gains competitiveness, how 400,000 American manufacturing jobs tied to export supply chains disappeared or relocated, how Canada positioned itself as indispensable gateway between Europe and North America, and how once infrastructure investment locks in at this scale, reversal becomes impossible. But before we dive in, if you appreciate deep analysis that goes beyond headlines, hit that like button and subscribe to stay informed on stories that truly matter. Let's start with what Carney actually announced. Standing alongside European Commission President, Canadian and EU flags behind him, Carney used one word repeatedly: historic. Historic step forward in relationship with alliance, historic cooperation framework, historic infrastructure commitments. The language was deliberate. This is not trade adjustment. This is strategic realignment. The partnership covers multiple dimensions: regulatory alignment across procurement standards, environmental certification, industrial compliance frameworks, Canada adopting European Union norms rather than American standards. Immediate effect: Canadian exporters no longer need dual compliance systems, build to EU specifications, sell to European market, bypass American regulatory maze entirely. Energy cooperation expanded. Canadian LNG terminals on Atlantic coast receiving European investment. Reverse flow becomes possible. Canada supplying European energy security. United States cut out of transatlantic energy architecture. Critical minerals framework established. Canada possesses lithium, cobalt, rare earths. Europe needs these for battery production, clean energy transition. Partnership creates direct supply chain. Canadian minerals processed in Canada, shipped to European manufacturers. American intermediaries eliminated. Defense industrial cooperation included. Canada and EU coordinating on military procurement, sharing technology, co-developing equipment, reduces dependence on American defense contractors, builds sovereign capability outside Washington's control. Most important element rarely discussed: dispute resolution mechanisms. Canada and EU establishing arbitration systems that exclude American jurisdiction. Commercial disputes settled under frameworks designed without U.S. participation. Legal architecture of transatlantic trade being rewritten. American courts, American lawyers, American precedents becoming irrelevant. This is not symbolic, this is structural, and Trump cannot stop it. Now, the numbers that Washington does not want discussed. Over past 3 years, American manufacturers absorbed $110 billion United States dollars in additional production costs, direct result of tariff-driven supply disruptions. Steel prices surged, aluminum became scarce, industrial components delayed at borders, precision machinery inputs tripled in cost. Average manufacturing costs increased 12 to 19% across export-dependent industries. These costs are not absorbed by corporations, passed to workers through wage stagnation, passed to consumers through price increases, passed to regional economies through factory closures. Employment data tells darker story. Industrial Midwest alone lost over 400,000 manufacturing jobs tied to export-oriented supply chains. Entire supplier ecosystems collapsed alongside them. Analysts calculate multiplier effect. For every lost factory position, 1.6 additional jobs in logistics, maintenance, local services disappeared, amplifying shock far beyond factory floor. Foreign direct investment into United States manufacturing slowed dramatically. Compared to pre-trade war projections, cumulative investment shortfalls now exceed 300 billion United States dollars. European firms that once expanded capacity inside United States, redirecting long-term capital toward Canada. Why? Regulatory stability. Canada-EU alignment offers insulation from tariff volatility. Canada became preferred industrial gateway. United States increasingly viewed as high-risk jurisdiction. Fiscal consequences equally severe. Lower export volumes, reduced corporate tax receipts. Emergency subsidies designed to offset tariff damage surged. Federal compensation programs for affected industries already exceeded 95 billion United States dollars, quietly widening structural deficit by estimated 180 billion United States dollars annually. These costs are not temporary, becoming embedded. For American households, trade war functions as silent tax. Prices for vehicles, appliances, construction materials, food inputs climbed steadily, eroding real purchasing power for middle-income and fixed-income families. Inflationary pressure driven by tariffs outpaced wage growth in multiple sectors, particularly workers over age 40 facing greatest barriers to retraining. This is contradiction at heart of trade war, sold as protection. Instead, accelerated erosion. Canada adapted, European Union rerouted, United States absorbed cost. But even these figures fail to capture most destructive consequence now unfolding beneath surface. The most dangerous phase of any trade realignment is not the announcement. It is what happens months and years later when infrastructure quietly moves and never returns. Shipping data reveals shift clearly. Transatlantic cargo volumes routed through Canadian Atlantic ports increased at annualized pace exceeding 28%. Comparable United States East Coast throughput stagnated or declined across high-value categories. These are not low-margin goods, advanced machinery, aerospace components, energy equipment, processed agri-food, precision manufactured parts, all once moved routinely through American ports, now bypassing entirely. This rerouting is not ideological, it is defensive. Multinational firms treating United States policy volatility as permanent cost factor rather than temporary disruption. Tariff exposure, regulatory unpredictability, retaliatory trade risks reclassified inside corporate planning models as structural liabilities. Procurement mandates rewritten to minimize United States touch points wherever possible. Canada, aligned with EU standards and protected from tariff shock, became preferred alternative. Result, logistics infrastructure inside United States beginning to hollow out. Warehousing vacancy rates along major export corridors rose sharply. Rail utilization tied to export manufacturing declined at double-digit rates. Trucking companies dependent on port-adjacent and cross-border flows facing wave of insolvencies. Industry analysts projecting more than 35,000 small and mid-sized operators could exit market within next 2 years. These failures cascade quickly, eroding local tax bases, regional employment stability collapsing, financial system feeling pressure as well. Trade finance volumes linked to United States-rooted commerce weakened significantly. Banks reporting lower fee income from letters of credit and long-term hedging instruments tied to American trade flows. Insurance underwriters raised premiums on United States-linked shipments, citing elevated exposure to retaliation and policy reversal risk. Even currency hedging activity beginning to favor benchmarks structured around Canada-EU corridors rather than U.S.-centered routes. Capital markets responding with quiet but decisive force. European institutional investors, including pension funds and sovereign-backed investment vehicles, reallocating capital away from United States industrial assets toward Canadian infrastructure at accelerating pace. Commitments now exceed tens of billions of United States dollars, directed into ports, energy terminals, battery manufacturing facilities, advanced materials processing, rail networks, designed explicitly to serve European markets without United States intermediation. These are not short-term trades, generational allocations, time horizons stretching 20 to 40 years. Inside United States, capital flight masked by headline stock market performance. Equity indices may fluctuate, but long-duration investment in productive capacity quietly draining away. New industrial projects delayed, downsized, or relocated, corporate boards no longer debating whether to diversify exposure away from United States, debating how quickly it can be done without triggering political backlash. This erosion of strategic depth is true cost of trade war. Strategic depth not measured in quarterly growth figures, measured in resilience, determines how economy absorbs shocks, secures essential inputs, sustains production under stress. By destabilizing trade relationships and alienating allies, United States reduced its buffer against future disruption. Canada, by contrast, increased resilience by embedding itself deeply within multiple economic blocs simultaneously. Geopolitical implications profound, supply chains are power, control over energy flows, critical minerals, advanced components, food security determines who sets terms during crisis. As Canada cements role within Canada-EU framework, gains leverage not only economically but diplomatically. United States, once indispensable coordinator of Western trade, becoming participant rather than leader, often viewed as unpredictable rather than essential. What makes this moment especially dangerous? Shift is self-reinforcing. Each firm that exits United States-centered supply chains makes next exit easier. Each Canada-EU contract reduces incentives to return. Each infrastructure investment locks in new routes, new dependencies, new standards. By the time full scale of this damage becomes visible in employment figures, fiscal accounts, industrial output, underlying cause will already be beyond correction. There is stage of decline more damaging than lost revenue, more enduring than lost jobs, more difficult to reverse than any recession. United States now entering that stage. For decades, American economic power did not rest solely on market size. It rested on rulemaking. United States wrote standards, shaped compliance frameworks, anchored dispute resolution, defined what normal looked like in global trade. That invisible authority allowed American firms to dominate even when not lowest cost producers, allowed Washington to project influence without direct confrontation. That authority now eroding. As Canada deepens integration with European Union, regulatory gravity shifting away from United States, procurement rules, environmental standards, industrial certification, dispute mechanisms increasingly designed without American input. In sectors ranging from advanced manufacturing to clean energy and food security, Canada-EU frameworks becoming default reference point. United States standards no longer assumed, they are optional, often avoided. This is quiet but devastating loss. Once firms adapt to non-United States regulatory ecosystem, returning becomes costly and unnecessary. Compliance teams, legal structures, production processes redesigned around new norms. Over time, American firms face stark choice: absorb cost of dual compliance or lose access altogether, many choosing latter, particularly small and mid-sized exporters already strained by trade war. Canada understands this dynamic well. By aligning regulatory regime with Europe, Canada positioned itself as standard bearer rather than follower. Canadian rules now embedded into long-term procurement contracts, infrastructure financing agreements, cross-border investment frameworks. This elevates Canada from supplier to system architect. Influence flows not from confrontation but from compatibility. The United States, meanwhile, paying price of unpredictability. Trade policy volatility trained global partners to hedge against American leadership rather than depend on it. Every tariff threat, every sudden exemption, every retaliatory cycle reinforces perception that access to United States market is conditional and politically fragile. Over time, perception becomes self-fulfilling. Firms stop planning around United States altogether. This shift has profound consequences for American leverage. In past crises, United States could rely on central role in trade networks to coordinate responses, enforce norms, apply pressure when needed. That leverage depended on indispensability. As Canada and European Union build parallel systems functioning smoothly without American participation, that leverage weakens. Influence that once came automatically now requires negotiation, and negotiation now comes with fewer bargaining chips. Trade war accelerated this loss. By treating trade as weapon rather than infrastructure, United States signaled that rules are temporary and access contingent. Canada responded by offering opposite: continuity, predictability, long planning horizons. In global economy defined by investment cycles measured in decades, that difference is decisive. effects already visible in capital allocation decisions, long-duration projects structured around Canada-EU standards. Financing instruments reference non-United States benchmarks. Arbitration clauses increasingly exclude American jurisdiction. These choices compound over time. Locking in pathways that persist regardless of political change in Washington. What makes this loss particularly dangerous? Not easily quantified. No headline number for lost rule-setting power. No quarterly report captures diminished agenda control. But once that power fades, regaining becomes extraordinarily difficult. History shows rulemakers rarely regain dominance after surrendering voluntarily. Canada did not need to challenge United States directly, simply needed to be reliable while United States was not. That contrast now institutionalized. Result is asymmetry of influence. Canada gains power quietly through contracts, standards, trust. United States loses power noisily through disputes, retaliation, policy reversals. Over time, markets internalize reality. Behavior adjusts accordingly. This is why current moment matters so deeply. United States not just losing trade flows, losing ability to shape environment in which trade occurs. That loss undermines long-term competitiveness, weakens diplomatic leverage, constrains future policy options. Canada, by contrast, locking in relevance across multiple dimensions of global economy. At this stage, question confronting United States no longer how much has been lost, but whether what has been lost can ever be recovered. What is now taking shape is not cyclical downturn or temporary loss of competitiveness. It is structural realignment of global trade power, one in which Canada quietly elevated itself into central coordinating role, while United States finds influence steadily diminished. Canada achieved this without military confrontation, without currency manipulation, without subsidy wars, simply by offering what Trump's America could not, predictability. Under logic of trade war, tariffs meant to force concessions and restore leverage. Instead, trained global partners to design systems functioning without United States at all. When Canada and European Union sign infrastructure financing agreements with 30-year time horizons, when they establish regulatory harmonization requiring decade-long compliance build-out, when they commit sovereign investment funds to projects that will not mature until 2050, they are not making temporary arrangements. They are building architecture that outlasts any single administration, any political cycle, any change in Washington's mood. This is what Trump never understood. Leverage in modern trade does not come from threats, comes from being indispensable node in networks others cannot easily replicate. United States was that node, past tense. Canada now becoming that node for transatlantic flows. European investors choosing Canadian ports because infrastructure reliable. Manufacturers choosing Canadian locations because regulatory environment stable. Traders choosing Canadian routes because political risk minimized. None of these choices dramatic, none announced with fanfare, but cumulatively they represent tectonic shift in economic geography of North Atlantic. It did not require grand strategy for Canada to defeat United States. Required only patience, consistency, clear understanding of how modern trade systems actually function. While Washington treated trade as tactical weapon, Ottawa treated it as infrastructure. While United States emphasized pressure, Canada emphasized reliability. Outcome now becoming visible, and most dangerous aspect is not loss itself, but delay in recognizing it. By time consequences fully visible in employment data, fiscal accounts, geopolitical influence, underlying architecture will already be locked in. Rebuilding would require not years, but decades. There is one final truth not yet openly acknowledged in Washington. If current trajectory continues, United States may soon face world in which it no longer primary reference point for global trade decisions. That moment, once unthinkable, now approaching quietly. Whether can still be avoided depends on choices not yet made. What those choices are and why delaying them further could carry cost far greater than any tariff ever imposed is final question that remains unanswered. What has unfolded through this trade war is not sudden collapse, but quiet turning point. Canada did not announce rupture with United States. European Union did not declare economic independence. Instead, markets adjusted, contracts shifted, supply chains moved with calculated precision. Result, unmistakable. Canada embedded itself deeper into architecture of transatlantic trade, while United States saw central role steadily diluted. What began as tariff leverage evolved into lost trust. What started as negotiating tactic became permanent infrastructure bypass. Consequences extend beyond trade balances, reach into employment stability, consumer prices, fiscal resilience, geopolitical leverage. Once alternative systems mature, returning to old order becomes extraordinarily difficult. Modern trade is not about transactions, about long-term integration. Canada recognized this early. United States hesitated. Question now no longer whether this shift is real. It is whether Washington willing to confront it honestly. Is this bold strategy that simply misfired, or catastrophic mistake that will shape economic future of United States for decades to come? For more fact-based analysis on global trade realignments, Canada's strategic positioning, and geopolitical shifts that mainstream media misses, subscribe and stay informed.